Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. The main focus of today's presentation is to discuss about an AI diagnostic system that outperforms human physicians on some of the most complex diagnostic cases in terms of accuracy by 4x, while spending less amount of money in order to get to the final diagnosis. This is incredible. However, it's still in the research phase, and the system has yet not been deployed in the real world. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because in the real world, a patient factors in so many other dimensions other than just cost, such as invasiveness, patient discomfort, patient burden, wait times, and access. Now, before going to the research main contributions, it's critical to understand the gap and the gulf that exists between the AI diagnosis research and human physicians. And how does this particular research fits into the ecosystem? Now, most AI diagnostic studies use static vignettes, meaning all the information about the patient is given upfront, meaning the patient's history, the examination findings, evaluation test results, etc. And the only objective of the language model is to select an answer from multiple choices. So this is one task, but the other task in existing research is to actually rank the possible diagnosis from most likely to least likely. So this is the current state of the existing research, but it misses the main point of what doctors and human physicians do on a day-to-day basis to actually evaluate an AI system properly. It ignores the iterative nature of real diagnosis, which basically means that a human physician or a doctor or diagnostician does not jump to the final diagnosis all at once. Instead, they refine their hypothesis or thinking step by step. So, for example, they might start by considering all the reasonable hypotheses, and based on new evidence, they might refine that and then come to the final diagnosis by asking questions, by asking for evaluation test results, etc. And this particular research, as we'll talk about in later slides, tries to follow the same principle in order to evaluate an AI system. The dataset used in this research is New England Journal of Medicine Clinicopathological Conference. It contains some of the most complex diagnostic cases that the human civilization has seen, from common conditions to rare disorders. And the hypothesis that this research has is that if the AI system can handle some of these most complex cases, then it will generalize well to some of the more routine clinical issues or cases that diagnosticians see on a day-to-day basis. And the reason for that is that these language models have been trained on massive amounts of data, and that data, the probability of having these routine cases is much more than having these rare conditions. And here are a few instances that I extracted from this particular website which has a corpus. The first major contribution of the research is the Sequential Diagnosis Benchmark. It mimics a multi-turn dialogic conversation that happens between the patient and the physician. It's an interactive framework for evaluating diagnostic agents through realistic sequential clinical encounters. Let's look at the visual present in the research paper. Now, on a high level, there are three main components or agents that are present in the benchmark. The first one is the diagnostic agent, which proxies a human physician. The second is the gatekeeper agent, which proxies the patient. And finally, the judge agent, whose function is to simply evaluate the final diagnosis with the ground truth diagnosis. Now, the diagnostic agent initially intercepts some short abstract from the gatekeeper agent, which generally contains some brief about the patient's history and the chief complaint about the patient. And once the diagnostic agent receives that, it can choose or select one of the following three actions. It can either ask a question, request a test, or submit the final diagnosis once it's confident of its prediction. While the gatekeeper agent receives that request and has a simple retrieval function that it needs to perform to actually search information present in the patient's case file. Now, if the information is present, then it is sent back to the diagnostic agent. However, if the information is absent, then synthetic information is generated, which follows the same distribution of the patient's case data, both numerically and descriptively. And the reason that they generate synthetic information if the requested information is not found in the patient's case data is to avoid misguiding the diagnostic agent, because the diagnostic agent in such a scenario just assumes that probably the search function or the route that it's functioning on is potentially suboptimal, and it needs to probably reroute itself to get back on track. And just to avoid this kind of behavior, the research basically instructs the gatekeeper agent to send some synthetic data back to the diagnostic agent. And this conversation goes on until the diagnostic agent confirms the final diagnosis. And the judge agent basically evaluates the predicted diagnosis at the end versus the ground truth diagnosis and outputs a score between 1 to 5, and it's considered correct if the evaluation score is above or equal to 4. In this particular benchmark, there are two main metrics that they factor in. One is obviously the diagnostic accuracy, but at the same time, they also factor in the cost. The second contribution of the research is the development of the diagnostic orchestrator. It builds upon the capabilities offered by the language models. It emulates a virtual panel of 5 medical personas or agents. For example, the hypothesis agent, test chooser agent, challenger agent, stewardship agent, and the checklist agent. The main role of the hypothesis agent is to produce 3 most likely hypotheses or diagnoses that a patient can have at each iteration or time snap. The test chooser agent's main function is to maximally discriminate those hypotheses. So, for example, if there are 2 diseases or 2 hypotheses that have same symptoms and only one shows up on an X-ray, then it's better to output X-ray as one of the tests because it's a choice of high value. The challenger agent basically outputs different viewpoints just to ensure that there are no gaps or limitations produced by the hypothesis and the test chooser agent. The stewardship agent ensures that the cost is under control and also ensures that we do not order low yield expensive tests, or also in certain cases it ensures that if there are 2 tests that have the same performance, then we always select the one that is cheaper. The checklist agent ensures quality control, ensuring that the right name of the test is outputted or there is consensus among all the doctor agents. All of them basically go through a chain of debate to select one of the following 3 actions, and the final decision is then made by the orchestrator to either request for some information from the gatekeeper agent or to continue the loop to gather more concrete evidence or to build better understanding of the current situation. From a technical standpoint, I think multiple thoughts come to my mind on how this could have been implemented. One potential approach is to embed these different personas in the context window of a single model, such as O3, for example. And I'm assuming that to a certain degree, the model might be capable of handling the different personas and reach to the final diagnosis. But that's just one approach. The second approach is to have these different agents as separate models which function as a cohesive unit and undergo chain of thought and pass all of that context to the orchestrator to make the decision at the end. And that seems quite plausible looking at the current structure of the diagram. However, the third approach is to actually think of it in the orchestrator sense to a certain degree, meaning the orchestrator has the ability to choose these tools. So instead of thinking of these as models, think of them as tools. Okay, under them there are models which are making the decisions, but the orchestrator has the ability to select the tools at the right time in the right order, which can then be fine-tuned in order to get massive performance gains. So these are multiple approaches which come to my mind on how this could have been implemented. Now, talking about the evaluation results, MAI-DxO establishes a new Pareto frontier, meaning at every cost point it produces highest accuracy versus off-the-shelf models and physicians. And it's also model agnostic and achieves on average about 11% performance gains across all the different hyperscalers. Just going to the diagram which shows this Pareto frontier. So in this particular diagram, the research first of all evaluates multiple variants of the diagnostic orchestrator. The instant answer is where the model is, or the orchestrator is only provided with the short abstract, and the function of the orchestrator is to directly output the final diagnosis. And to me, it's not quite surprising that it outperforms all the human physicians, because thinking about it more deeply, these off-the-shelf models have been trained on massive amounts of data, which not only cover the range, that is breadth of knowledge, but also have the specialist capability to also handle depth of knowledge. And it's very rare for a human physician to be able to handle both of those cases. The questions only scenario is where the diagnostic orchestrator has been given the ability to only ask questions and not order any tests. And then there are other constrained budgeted scenarios. There's an unconstrained budget where the orchestrator has the ability to order any number of tests that are possible. to get to the final diagnosis. And the ensemble approach is where multiple virtual panels are run in parallel, and there's this high-level decision-making function which takes in the output of all the other functions which are getting run in parallel as input to make the final decision. The current limitations of the research are, first of all, the data set used in the research contains some of the most rare and complicated diagnostic cases and do not contain more routine clinical cases that a physician sees or looks at on a day-to-day basis. And hence, the system needs to be evaluated on those cases to ensure that there are no false positives, because the system has been trained to always output a diagnosis. And how would it perform on a case which has benign symptoms? Would it still output a diagnosis? It's still an open question that needs to be evaluated. The factors that the research takes into account today is just cost rather than accuracy, and hence needs to factor in other factors such as invasiveness, patient discomfort, and wait times. The third limitation is the human physicians were not given access to search tools or language models. And the reason for that is because the search tools already have access to the answers of some of the complex cases present in the dataset. And the language models as well really help guide the physician to get to the final answer quickly. And essentially, the research authors wanted to evaluate human physicians and not language models implicitly. So multiple questions come to my mind. One, are we actually measuring AI against the wrong benchmark? So I guess I alluded to that earlier. So these AI have incredible capabilities of covering both breadth and depth of knowledge, but the human physicians against which it was evaluated rarely has all of this knowledge embedded in a single human brain. And potentially evaluating a single human physician is probably not the right idea, and hence we need to evaluate such a system such as Diagnostic Orchestrator or against a hospital-like system which has both generalists and specialists. So I think that would be the right evaluation setting. And secondly, now given that AI can handle such complex diagnostic cases sequentially by asking the right questions, ordering the right tests, and making the final diagnosis, what does the role of a physician look like? Does it shift from information gathering to diagnosing some of the even more complex diagnostic cases, or some sort of communication role, or potentially something even else? And finally, we need to deploy such an innovative and a useful system in the real world to truly understand the benefits and even the limitations, so that we can quickly use that feedback and update the system to get the real meaning out of it. And it's really important to do this or make this deployment as soon as possible, so that the people who are going through such complex conditions can get the true benefit out of it. Thank you.